In this video, we're going to be going over how to set up our scene so we can paint with the PBR materials. So the first thing that I want to do is go from default to advanced. That's going to let me kind of see everything. The other thing that you might notice in here is we have that directional light that was up here for our light bake. So it's casting a shadow right here that I'm not super fond of. So I'm just going to go into perspective, go to light, directional light. I'm just going to move that out of the way. And you can see that it updates in real time. Then I'm going to get out of my directional light by going back to perspective. And then we're ready to get started. So the next thing I want to do is give my scene an environment. So if I have the Modo content installed, I can hit F6. Go to my environments right here, open those up, choose indoor or outdoor, and double click any of these. And that'll add that HDR image to the environment map. But if you don't have the Modo content installed on Google Drive, I provided you with an image. So what you're going to do is go to Environments, open up Environment, and click on this Environment Material. Then, just like kind of adding a texture, we're going to do Add Layer, Image Map, Load Image, and then inside of, well, for Google Drive for you, there should be this Japan_subway2. It's an EXR file, so we're just going to hit open on that. That should take a sec. You'll see it load in. Your lighting might change very slightly, just like that. And then from here, if we want, we can turn this directional light off. We can leave it on, change its settings, do whatever we want. But just to double check that this is working, we're going to jump into the Render tab, hit Render. I have my helicopter, and then if I look around the helicopter, I can actually kind of see this subway scene. So let's zoom out so our helicopter is not so big. We can see that there's some lights over here. So realistically, our helicopter is being lit by the whiter parts of this image. If I look straight up, it's just the ceiling. It's just kind of, we put our helicopter right in an environment. The bottom of it, though, looks a little bit goofy. It's just all black, so we're not getting a lot of light from. But again, the scene would kind of be like this because there's lights on the top. If there was this much light straight down, the bottom of this would be perfectly lit because it's going to be reflecting those lights. So now that our light is set up, we're ready to get started with applying materials. And actually, one more thing before I forget, another thing you can do with these HDR lights is I'm just going to turn my directional light off. And if we look at this, you can see that it's lit from this side. It's not very lit from this side. Again, the bottom's not lit, just referencing back to what we just talked about. But what you can actually do is this little guy right here. If I click on him, this is actually your, so we can see it. It's actually clicking on that image. So what I can do from here is, again, I'm in part mode. So if you hit 5, that's the hotkey. I can hit E to rotate, and then I can click and drag, and this will probably be a little sluggish because I'm recording this, but give it a bit, and you'll see the lighting update as soon as it does its thing. There we go. So again, just remember that this image, if I was to rotate the image here, what's going to happen is this whole scene is going to rotate. So right now, there's a lot of light coming on the helicopter's right side, and that's because over here, there's this big, huge window that has all that light coming from it. So that's kind of how that works. So again, if you don't like your current lighting, most likely your best bet is actually just rotate this light around until you like it, or choose a different HDR environment. Really don't need this directional light on. I'm going to leave it in there and kind of turn it on and off just so we can see how the light interacts with the materials that we have going on though. So what I'm going to do to get this rolling is go to my shading tree. We already have a helicopter material. I'm actually just going to close this environment so it's not as much stuff on the screen at one time. So we have our material here. So just like in the other video, I'm going to go to Add Layer, go to Custom Materials, choose Unity. That effectively it overrides this material with this material. Now we need to start dumping in all of our textures. So, oops, I'm just going to turn this light off because again, that's kind of intense. So what I need at this time is a handful of images. So what I'm going to do is just let's go to Images, Add Clip, and we're just going to create new images. So creating a new image, I mean, you guys have used Photoshop probably for a bunch of years, but what you're going to do is you could either jump into Photoshop and make a let's say 1024 by 1024 image and just make it all black or all white or neon pink, it doesn't really matter, and then start applying those layers. Just doing this and staying inside of Modo though, what I'm going to do is I'm on this little images tab, and again, if you don't see this images tab, you might need to jump to the paint tab, and then on this tab you'll have an images tab. I have one on this one. Again, that's one that you can just drag and drop off and customize however you want. I have a different video for customizing your UI, but regardless, just need to be on this images tab. So I'm going to do new image, and I'm going to make this a PNG. On the desktop, I have this little PBR workflow folder, so I'll just make it in here. So I'll type this helicopter _ metal. And I'll actually just copy this real quick, because we'll be making a couple of these. And we'll make this a 1024. Add clip, new image, make it a PNG. It's going to save in the same spot. Helicopter gloss or smoothness, we'll just stick with how Modo calls it. Normally you're going to call it a gloss map though. Set to 1024. And then jumping into that shading tree, let's just add both of those to the list. So we want them to be above the Unity material. So what I'm going to do is click the Unity material, and just like in Photoshop, if I was to hit new layer, the new thing gets imported kind of above what you have selected. So the same thing's going to happen here. I want it above this Unity material. So let's do add layer, and let's do, under recent I have load image, but you could also just go to image map and load image right here. So I'm just going to choose that metal. It's named metal. Or we can do it the tried and true method of the smoothness one. I can just drag and drop this. I want it right on top of the metal. And then let's actually grab our diffuse and throw that in there as well. This is called LB for light bake. That just has the light bake added. It's just that image that we created. So this technically has the AO and the light bake in it. So now what I need to do is start assigning these to what they actually are. When you just drag and drop them, it just defaults to this diffuse color. So the LB one, that one is actually our diffuse. So we'll go to Unity and change it to Unity Albedo. Again, Unity Albedo and diffuse are similar. Smoothness, click on that, Unity, and Unity Smoothness all the way at the bottom. And then this, click on diffuse color. Again, I can either click on diffuse color, or I can click on this little drop down. Technically, from here all the way over to here, it's all the same thing. It doesn't matter where you click. So Unity, Unity Metallic. So again, this Unity Metallic, the smoothness, both of these, if I was to look at these images, they're just going to be, boom, looking at this, it just has the checker pattern, so they're just empty pixels effectively. So now what we're going to do is jump to the Paint tab. And again, on this tab, I'm also going to make sure that I have it in the advanced. And you can see that this is taken a little bit. Actually, it already was in the advanced, so we'll go team. And then we're ready to get started on this. So an additional thing that you might not be very keen on is there's this little texture locator down here. Remember, that's just kind of referencing your HDR image or your background image. So some people don't like that there. So if you hit the O key, you can go to this visibility tab, and then right here, texture locators. If I click that, it turns off. Doesn't matter if that's on or off. Just know, same thing with like lights or something like that. If you turn that off, that's going to stay off until you turn it back on. So you might want that off, you might not. It just kind of depends. So let's get into changing this guy. So over here, we can think of these as exactly what they are. They're three different images. So this guy is going to be our diffuse image. This is going to be our smoothness image, and this is going to be our metal image. So you can also think of these as like layers in Photoshop that are going to turn into their respective images. So normally what we would do if we're painting textures in Modo is we'd have our diffuse image, or in this case our albedo image, selected. The mesh is selected right here. Go to our airbrush, change our brush size. We have it to a white color. I paint on this and it makes it white. So there's nothing really magical about that. We already kind of know what's going on there. So, but I had you guys do, for extra credit, if you so chose to do it, was to kind of finish texturing this. You could make some cool panel lines on here. Again, there's no steady stroke in here, and I'm using a tiny tablet. So again, you could just see how this thing is kind of broken down. Do your own thing, put little bolts and rivets and dust and all that cool stuff on here. So from here, once our diffuse is kind of done, and you can really do this in any order, what I can do is just switch to my smoothness. So if I go down here and I just click on this little guy, now I'm painting on the smoothness layer. So I still have the airbrush selected. Our foreground color, let's set this to pure white. Let's make a big old brush and let's do a stroke across this. So as you can see, now we have a shiny surface, and it's only shiny right here. If I look over here, it's not all that shiny. If I click on this Unity material though, go on the texture layers, it has some inherent properties to it, so it has some amount of smoothness. I can set that to 0. Now you can see the whole thing overall is significantly less smooth. I would recommend doing that, and then you get to just control how much smoothness is there. So, oops, I'm gonna backtrack. I was painting on this actual material. You don't want to do that. Let's go back to the smoothness, and then as I paint on that, you can see this build up and get more and more smooth. So let's just hit the undo key a few times. Let's actually undo my property. I'm just going back to no more strokes. So there we go. Grab our Unity material, smoothness, set this to 0, hit enter. You can see that everything's now not that default smoothing value, because there might be something like the bottom of this might have a bunch of dust on it, and I don't want it sitting at 50% smoothness. I might want it a little bit lower. But the same thing, if this whole helicopter is metallic, I might be like, oh, let's set it to 90 and then go from there. Go ahead and set this to 92. So now we have a super metallic. It almost looks like a Christmas ornament. So again, these values, I would say just set these to 0 and let your textures, your smoothness texture and your metal texture handle these. This is kind of the purpose for this, and why it's good is if you had like a crate in your scene or something that wasn't textured, it was just a cube that had some cool geo, you could set its base color, its metallic, and its smoothness like right inside the game engine, and you wouldn't necessarily have to texture that object if it didn't need a texture. So that's why these are here. So in our case though, we're just going to have these set to 0. So from here, let's go back to the smoothness value, and I could even take this fill amount and be like, okay, let's fill this. Obviously probably not this much. So instead of changing my smoothness amount, I'm actually going to change my foreground color. So let's set this to something a little bit darker. Let's go in here. If I look at this, it has a little rating of go all the way to white, it's set to 1. Go all the way down, it's set to 0. So let's set it in this realm of about 0.6. Click on it. Oops, I'm ahead on the airbrush. I want to have it on the fill tool. So click on it, and now it fills. So now I have a general smoothness. Again, we were at 50%, now it's at 0.6, so maybe I want to make this a little bit more shiny, something like that. So again, this is something that you can kind of play with, mess with, and be like, okay, overall, the majority of the things in the scene I want set to be this smooth. Let's do the metal as well. So again, we just have this set to a fill. So if it's at the 0.81 and I fill this in, it's going to be fairly metallic. I can crank this up even more though, and kind of get this right where I want it. So from here, what I can do is, again, I'm treating these like different layers, and I'm just painting black and white. I'm not painting any colors on these. So from here, this smoothness, let's go to our airbrush, and let's just think about these materials. So the helicopter, like the brown parts of it, this is going to be a metal, but it's going to have paint on it. So it's not going to look like something like raw copper by any means, because it would corrode and be terrible, and the army would be sad. So what we're going to do, switch to the airbrush tool. Look at this little gray area. This is going to be kind of the window that the pilot sees out of. So this is going to actually have a metallic value of, in our case, let's put it all the way down to 0. I mean, it's a window. It is 100% not metal at all. So I could even change this to a hard brush, go in and just fill this out. So this is one of those things that if I was doing this inside of, let's say, Photoshop, I could just do a color tolerance fill and do this, and it would most likely be a little bit faster. but I would be seeing this as a black and white image. So again, a little bit of a difference there. So let's go ahead and finish this up. I'm only going to do this side. Actually, in my infinite wisdom, forgot to turn symmetry on. But again, this is just kind of a demo to get you started. We're not going to make anything completely done here. So there we go. That metal is 0. Smoothness. Let's actually crank this up because it's glass. It's going to be something that's a little bit more smooth. So now we have a little bit better reflections. So this could be something that maybe for whatever reason you want it even more smooth, do something like that. So again, this is something that you can just kind of play with and figure out what you think looks good or not. So I want to be careful not to be painting this area. That's one of those things that if your software is painting this slow, I mean, you can see I have a gaming laptop that's kind of mid-grade. It's not even anything special, and it's painting on this just fine. But if for whatever reason you have a video card that just doesn't like this 3D painting, what you can actually do to speed up the process is just grab only the portion of the texture that you want to paint on. So let's actually do this whole side. So I want just this, grab that. And again, sometimes this doesn't make sense because if you had like a rounded window right here, I wouldn't want to paint this. But again, just having a lesser amount of polygons visible is going to help out the speed of this overall. And I can paint on this entire thing. And again, I have pressure sensitivity because I have a pen. So let's do that. Let's take this foreground color all the way to black. Excuse me. Go to metal, and we're just going to turn the metal off effectively. So U to unhide, crank our brush setting down. So now we have a glossy window, and then the body of the helicopter is not glossy. So let's kind of modify this thing up. We're just going to use that same technique so we don't accidentally fill other things. Go to our airbrush, make it really big, metal. Let's actually crank this up to a really high amount. Let's just make it 100% metal. Fill this in. Go to our smoothness. Fill this one in as well. You can kind of see where this is going. So now I have a big, huge, overly shiny globe on the front for this gunner. So just like in the demo that I showed you with the chest, ideally we don't want to have solid colors for all of our random maps. I guess not random, for solid colors for our smoothness map and our metal map. What we want to do is have a little bit of texture variation. So that's where these kind of the paint tools come into play. So we have different brushes here. And to test these out, what I'm actually going to do is jump back to my albedo layer, change my color to something a little bit more standoutish, so something like white, change that brush size, and what I'm going to do is just do a test stroke on there. So this, depending on what brush I choose, is going to give me a little bit of variation in my brush stroke. So all of these you can kind of change and see which ones you like. So let's kind of go over a little bit of settings here, just a little bit more paint stuff that we haven't covered before. So one of the things that happened when I clicked on one of these brushes is this little guy right here called nozzle turned on, and that was never on before. So let's turn nozzle off. Let's go back to this airbrush, do a stroke, and this is back to our normal brush. As soon as I select one of these, you're going to see a bunch of things change over here. So this nozzle came on, down here a little image appeared, over here this little stamp kind of showed up. It's just texture image brush. So now when I do this stroke, it's going to kind of add these settings. So technically I could just go to the airbrush, turn on this texture, turn on the nozzle, and pick an image. So if you have a random alpha that you like to work with inside of Photoshop, you can kind of make your own custom brush. So ideally this is looking a little bit too muddy and swirly to me. So this guy right here, I'm just going to increase this from 5% to something like 30%, do a test stroke, and now you can see these are just little dots that are just kind of coming across. So that might be a little bit too high. Set it down to 20. That'll be better. So again, we're just going to do a stroke of this right onto our smoothness map and just see what happens. Again, we already have this set to white. So now if I look at this, it's got a bunch of texture to it. So this is something that, let's actually take our foreground color and make it a little bit darker. Is that too dark? Yeah, a little bit. Just a quick tip for if I'm just changing this color-wise. If I hold shift, click on one of these and drag left and right, that's going to change all these values at the same time. Technically, this is red, green, and blue, so I could say no, no, maximum red, just by clicking and dragging on these numbers, and I can change them. I also have this little slider down here if you prefer that one. But if I hold, let's make this one go down. If I hold shift and click and drag on one of these, it's going to make all the values go correspondingly up or down at the same time, so effectively sliding this left and right. So once I have it set to all the way white, I can hold shift, drag to the left, drag to the right, and you can see that it's just dragging this bar right here to the left and the right. So let's put that about 0.88, do a test stroke, that's showing up. So actually I'm just going to make this a little bit more extreme because I want to make sure with the video compression that you kind of see what's going on here. So this is atrocious and it works. So again, we have a higher metal value, and then this is our gloss value. So technically, if let's go ahead and make a little bit of a stroke on here. Now I have a very weird textured gloss map. My diffuse is still set to just a solid color. So let's jump into the metal. Let's do the same thing where I grab, kind of just doing a weird stroke on the metal, take it all the way down to no metal, do a weird stroke. It's like I'm almost erasing the metal. And now I'm getting a bunch of texture variation here. So at any time, I can see these textures in black and white. So I'm just going to turn my albedo off, turn my metal off, go to my smoothness, change it to a unity albedo. And now this is what the black and white image looks like. So again, my lighting is still in the scene. I could change this to texture. Now it's going to be exactly black and white. There's no influence. You can see I actually missed the little spot right there. It's not a big deal. And missed this spot there, so that's actually probably an unwrap error. Not a big deal. Let's look at that real quick and just see what's going on with it. So yeah, so unwrap is perfectly fine. That's an error in the texture. It's not a big deal. Let's jump back to the paint tab so I can fill that in. Actually, it looked like it was apparently a display error. So again, that's another weird thing that Modo does if I jump from different shading types. So cool, you guys get to see some live troubleshooting. But regardless, this is our gloss map. So if I go over to this images tab, all these little guys, these are our images that are getting referenced, so they haven't been saved yet. So I want to right click, hit save, right click, hit save. I'm not going to worry about the diffuse. I really didn't change that one up. But if I go to my folder and I look at these now, helicopter smoothness, double click, this is just a black and white image. So again, these seem like they could be potentially complicated, but realistically they're actually really, really simple. It's just the interaction between this guy. Let's go ahead and make these the same size. This is our smoothness. This is our metal. Again, this has some whites, some grays, and some blacks in there. So you have kind of two different things being black and white images that are kind of fighting each other or working with each other, depending on how you see it, to kind of display what's going on here. So let's go back to advanced, change this back to a smoothness, this back to an albedo, turn both of these on, and now we can see what's going on with this. So realistically from here, what I want to do is I want to kind of like think this through as far as what my textures would be. So if this, let's say, I mean this is brown, so I'm guessing it is a desert helicopter, but I don't rightfully know. Right here, we have this little panel here. So realistically, there's this little wedge right here. So if you think of a car, anywhere where there's kind of a little wedge area, and especially this being on the front of the helicopter, if this guy is zooming through the desert, like so, what's going to happen is a bunch of dust is going to collect on the front of this. When he lands, it's going to kick up a bunch of dust, and then it's going to sprinkle on the top of this. There might not be as much dust on the bottom. It really depends on how it's getting used. So potentially, these little cracked areas are going to have a little bit more dust in them. So let's kind of simulate that scenario. Go to our smoothness. And right now we had it set to, actually just kind of a quick trick, set this to albedo, turn this off. I can middle mouse select, and that'll grab this gray color. that's effectively grabbing my smoothness, and then I can paint over this to effectively erase this set of shenanigans that I was doing. I don't want to get into this area. And I can do the same thing with this, set it to albedo, turn it on, middle mouse click, you can see my color changed over here, and then I can just come in here and erase this out. Ideally, I would have just not done that, but I was demoing stuff, so it's all good. So change this back to a metallic, change this back to a smoothness, turn on, turn on, turn on. And now, just to be safe, we're going to go ahead, hit save. That saves our 3D file. Go over to our images, right-click, save, right-click, save. Now if we had a crash, we'd be fine. So getting back to our task at hand, we have the airbrush. We're going to go ahead and select one of these brushes. And again, when I switch from this brush to this brush, the settings all kind of reset. So this interpolation, I might have to turn that back up to 20. My nozzle's on. Let's do a quick test stroke. That's about where I want it. Other thing, Shift A will kind of recalibrate where everything is. Let's unhide that. If I'm painting in this area, I can grab those polygons, Shift A, deselect those polygons, go back to our airbrush, change our settings to whatever. So something like that. There we go. So let's undo that stroke. This foreground color is going to be a little bit darker. We won't do all the way black. And I could even drop the opacity a little bit if I wanted to. But then from here, what I can do, so let's actually make sure that we're painting on the right one. We're on the smoothness. It's set to smoothness, albedo, metallic. Okay, we're good. So now what's going to happen is, again, back to what we were originally saying, is I want to kind of focus in this area and say that it's going to be a little bit more dusty. So if we have a little bit of dust on the surface, what we're going to do is, this is set foreground colors a little bit darker, put it at about 0.18. So now when I do a stroke on this, we're just doing this at a really light opacity. And again, I'm doing it a little bit more extreme so you can see it. Now what happens is we have a low gloss value, but a high metal value. So let's go back to the metal. Let's do the same thing, effectively turning the metal off in this area. So now if I hit this with the light, what's happening is we're getting gloss in the glossy metally area and no gloss in the non-metally, non-gloss area. Again, there's supposed dust on the surface. So again, other thing that you can do with this is, let's just switch back, turn this image off, turn the nozzle off. Smoothness. Let's say that I wanted to put a scratch on here. I apparently have to make it bigger because the UVs are kind of small. So again, if there's a scratch, there's going to be some stuff collected in it. So I could go to the diffuse, get a little bit darker of a color, make a scratch, make this kind of big just so we can see what's happening. Go to the smoothness. I'm going to go ahead and that one. And the metallic, it's still going to be fairly metallic in there. So let's do that. So something like that. So now this, as soon as I zoom out, maybe turn the wireframe off, this kind of reads as an overly huge, but still there kind of scar in this. Because again, we could change the value so they're not this intense. Again, I'm making everything significantly more intense. You can see it on the camera. But again, when you see the light interact with this, there's no gloss in that area, so it's not shining. Again, highlight in this whole area, but no highlight right in this focused area. And you can see how the light interacts with that. So again, same thing with this. Let's go to the smoothness, have this cranked down. You can have a handful of scratches in this window that as soon as I zoom out, I interact with the light. Where is it at? There we go. Just trying to figure out where the reflection's at. You can see how this interacts with it. So again, the other thing, if you need an area where you have like a stroke here that is going to be in both channels, that might be something that might be better to do inside of Photoshop potentially, because again, you can just copy paste that same stroke. But again, I'll leave that one up to you. So kind of the next step with this, I mean, it'd be easier if we had a better diffuse, because again, let's say that there was some type of a seal around this window. Again, it's not going to be metal that just sticks right on top of glass. That's going to ask for something to break. Let's focus on this area. Just turn symmetry on, do a test stroke, perfect. So ideally there's going to be some type of probably plastic or rubber seal that goes through this. And again, as soon as this is fully established, what I can do is say, okay, now that this is here, we're going to have it not be metallic at all because it's plastic or rubber, and then have the gloss value be knocked down quite a bit. So the other thing that you can do, kind of the last thing that we'll kind of touch on with this, is if I was doing this in something like 3D Code or Photoshop, I could just have a layer right here that is just called window frame, for example. And then this window frame layer, what I could do would be grab that layer that would just be this portion, copy paste that onto my smoothness map, which would be kind of a separate code file or a separate PSD document. Then it's going to come in, if I copy paste it, it's going to be black. So smoothness, I want that a little bit lighter than that. So in Photoshop, I just take the levels or take the brightness and just adjust that. Because again, if I use the slider, it's going to be on a black and white or a grayscale. So I can slide this all the way over to like a light to medium gray. So then it'll have a little bit of a reflective value to it. And then for the rubber, I could copy paste it and then just slide it all. I'm sorry, the rubber portion, I could grab that layer, copy paste it into my metal map, and then hue shift that all the way dark so it's all the way black, because again, it's going to be plastic. So again, this highlight isn't very good. Let's go to the smoothness. Take that about to 0.3, test stroke so we can see where that's at. Take it up just a little bit. Ideally, instead of repainting this, I would just copy paste my layer in Photoshop and then adjust the levels. Because again, the pixel detail is in the correct spot, it's just the wrong color. So let's jump to metal. Take this all the way, all the way to black. We want metal turned completely off. And again, I'm just doing this in full so you can see the textures inside of Photoshop. Something like that. As soon as I zoom out, I can see the light interact with this. Let's even turn the albedo off. Let's grab this, the Unity material, base, making it darker. This is just so I can see what's going on in the scene. But now, this is a fully gray model. I can see my pseudo dust in there, my little scratch right there. But now I can see how this is interacting with my little window. And you can see even this with an all gray material is actually starting to look kind of cool as far as me spending all of 10 minutes painting on it. But you can see how these maps definitely add to what you have going on. So let's take that back up to white, turn our albedo on, save this, right click, save. Another thing, if I was to hit cancel, it'll say, hey, do you want to save these images? Yes, no. So you'll just want to make sure that you save those, because again, if you don't, these images are lost forever. Because again, they're just temporary inside of Modo. They don't permanently save or get recovered in any way. You have to manually save those. So let's take a look at these images. Let's just grab all three of these and put them inside the same document inside of Photoshop. And again, this is taking these into Photoshop is literally just to compare what's going on here. We're not actually going to have these in the same texture by any means. So if I look at these, let's go ahead and name these real quick. We have our smoothness map. That one we can keep as is, and this one is metal. So let's grab this and plunk it right in the scene. So we'll just call this diffuse. So if I look, we have our little black line that we created. Turn on the metal. That one, again, same black line. You can kind of see where my little inaccurate strokes were, especially up here. Turn that off, turn this on, and then you can see the same thing. So you can see the power of this. If I was to work with this inside of Photoshop, we can, I mean, these lines are obviously on here. We can pretend like they're not. So we have, these can just get removed. So now we have our kind of working scenario of this is our smoothness map, this is our diffuse, and this is our metal. So what I can do is put this guy on a new layer, and we'll go ahead and just make this a kind of obvious to see green color. We're going to pretend like it's the black though. And again, I could probably, I don't know if this is perfectly symmetrical. I might be able to use the symmetry tool. And set this up. Again, it depends on if my unwraps were perfectly symmetrical or not. And let's crank our opacity. So again, ideally with this, you'd want to be as accurate as needed for it to look as good as you want. So somewhere in there. Actually make this a little bit thicker. Just using straight lines to make this go faster. So let's actually make this something a little bit more appropriate, like a dark, really dark brown color, let's say, not just because it's so thick that we can see it. And we'll actually turn symmetry off. So from here we have this, and we would name it window frame, windshield frame, whatever you want to call it. So from here I'm just going to take this layer, drag and drop it into my metal one. And again, this one, I need it to be grayscale, so we'll just saturation all the way down. Now from here, I have something that I can work with and change the opacity up. So again, this is supposed to be a plastic / rubber seal. So we're going to pretty much take that all the way to black. Grab the same thing, put it into our smoothness one. And again, since this is like a dense plastic, it's actually going to be a little bit more smooth. So let's put that up to like a medium gray. And now you see I didn't have to make the same stroke all the way around this 3 separate times. I just made it once in Photoshop, copied it over, changed the values. So again, sometimes it's faster to do this stuff inside of Photoshop, sometimes it's not. It just depends on what you're working with. And the same thing here, I can use crazy grunge brushes, brush dynamics, a bunch of cool stuff that Photoshop has that Modo might not have to get your kind of texture where you need it. So from here in Modo or in Unity, or I'm sorry, not Unity, in Photoshop, what you'd actually want to do is just save these out as textures, upload them, and then you would have your asset to put in a game or whatever. But for this assignment, I think that's kind of enough direction for you guys to really get the hint of this. I probably took this video longer than I originally wanted to, so probably a little bit of redundant stuff in there. So I apologize for that. But just kind of get this helicopter looking a little bit better. Again, we don't have to make it look amazing, but just know that finishing the diffuse, making your metal and gloss actually look really nice as opposed to kind of mediocre like this, is just kind of a little bump of extra credit for you. But again, have those uploaded and you'll be all set.